It's been a US election campaign chock full of surprises, and even now, no one really knows the likely winner. Will Donald Trump make a comeback, or could Kamala Harris become the first black woman to move into the White House? And what will the result mean for Australia and the world? To answer those questions, our panel from New York, a man who worked for and knows Donald Trump pretty well, Anthony Scaramucci. Australia's former spy chief and ambassador to Washington, Dennis Richardson. Deputy editor of Foreign Affairs magazine, Amelia, and senior fellow at the United States Study Centre, Bruce Wolpe. Welcome to Q&A. Hello, I'm Patricia Carvelis. I want to pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on whose land we are broadcasting from tonight. Remember, you can live stream us around the country on iView and all the socials. Quandra is the hashtag. Please get involved. To get us started tonight, here's a question from Frank Rayner. Hi, Frank.
Hi. Polls, this is for the whole panel. Polls suggest that Kamala Harris is going to be the likely winner at the US presidential elections. But who do you think will win and why?
I think we might start with you, Anthony. Who's going to win the election? Easy one.
Well, okay, yeah. Well, not that easy, but I do think she's going to win, and I'll just supply three quick facts. We knocked on... It's like a stay of execution for me, actually, but we knocked on 807,000 doors yesterday. We did 940,000 phone calls in Pennsylvania. She is up outside the margin of error in Wisconsin and Michigan. She is not up outside the margin of error in Pennsylvania. So she spent the last couple of days in Pennsylvania. She's doing a concert tonight in Pennsylvania, which, frankly, I do not like. That concert has got a lot of stars in it, and it's sort of an elitist thing to me. And I'll just point out, in 2016, Hillary Clinton did a concert like that in Philadelphia when Donald Trump was in a farm field in western Pittsburgh. And so he won the state. Secretary Clinton lost the state. But I think she's going to win, and I think she'll eke out in Pennsylvania. But that's why everyone's there right now, including the Obamas.
Let me just pick you up on that. You say you don't like that she's doing this concert because of the elitism that's kind of the connotation. Why are they doing it then if there is the warning from the Hillary Clinton campaign?
Well, no, I don't think there's a warning from the Hillary Clinton campaign. I think these guys worked on the Hillary Clinton campaign and thought that was successful. But I worked on the Donald Trump campaign in 2016 and can tell you I didn't think that was successful. My family is from Pennsylvania. My grandfather was a coal miner in northeastern Pennsylvania. And her being in Philadelphia with the stars and Trump being out with sort of the non-elites, I think it's just better visual for him. I told them not to do that. I explained to them why. They're doing it anyway. But there's one other thing that happens when you pull 20,000 people into the Wells Fargo arena. They're not in the field. They're not banging on doors. You still have 12 hours to bang on doors, meet people, talk to people, make sure somebody has a ride to the polling station. She's way more organized than him. She has way more money than him. His field operation is non-existent. At some point, some Republican, if they ever have a backbone, would have to ask him what he did with the money. You know, he's put his daughter-in-law in charge of the RNC. You can't find the field operation anywhere. Republican candidates didn't get any money from the RNC this time to run their campaigns. They usually get something if they're in close races. So she's ahead of him in terms of organization, and she's ahead of him in terms of what I think is the stuff that matters on Election Day. That's the get out the vote, volunteers that are going to help people get out the vote. But I just don't like the elitist stuff, particularly in a state like that.
Bruce Wolpe, what do you think?
There are two drivers in this election. One is the economy and immigration and those issues, and that's where Trump is actually strongest. Voters say, yeah, those are the two biggest issues. Who's best to manage those issues? They say Trump. But if you're talking about the future of the country and the future of democracy, and then you get into his character and his narcissism, his extremism, his vengeance, his retribution that he wants to exert, and he's been on the stage for 9 years now, and Kamala Harris is saying, we're better than this. We can turn the page. Plus, the extremely strong issue of abortion and reproductive health rights that she has championed. 52% of the electorate are women. And as we saw in a poll in Iowa over the weekend, it's two Republican states, Kansas and Ohio, have passed protections for abortion rights. She's capitalizing on that. I agree with everything Anthony said about the organization. She's outpointing Trump on all fronts, and so she can win this election.
She can. Amelia, will she?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't share Bruce's optimism on this one. Nate Silver said this is the closest election he's ever seen. He's a pollster who knows much more about polls than journalists generally do. From a journalist perspective, we've been talking a lot about vibes this election because the numbers are too close in many cases, and it's going to come down to how 100,000 people in 3 states feel about it. So in terms of the vibes, they've been seesawing back and forth. I know my group chats with American friends feel completely different from one day to the next. It seemed like for a long time there, Trump had the momentum in the last few days. Harrison Ford, Cardi B, the celebrities could be a win for her. They could be damaging. But I think right now it does feel the momentum is with her. But again, it's how those 100,000 people feel on election day.
And we haven't polled all 100,000 people. Dennis, obviously the broad consensus is it's too close to call. But how are you seeing it?
Well, what I'd do, I'd go out to the Sydney pet shops. I would talk to 50 galahs, knowing certainly that 25 of them would give me the right answer.
All right, I think we know how Dennis feels, which is don't ask Dennis Richardson for the result of an election in the US before we get the result. OK, next we'll hear from Jennifer Waltman. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi. I'm an American, and I've lived in Australia for almost 18 years. Mr. Scaramucci, you stated in the lead-up to the 2016 election that Trump's rhetoric was anti-American and very, very divisive. How do you feel his messages and rhetoric have changed since he was in office? And what do you think is most at stake for Americans if he's reelected?
Anthony?
Well, it's a great question, and listen, if you go to the New York Times 2 days ago, there's a very big front page article on the amping of Mr. Trump's rhetoric. And so I think Mr. Trump's rhetoric has moved 2 quantums since 2016. It's way more aggressive. It's way more violent. He talked yesterday about shooting journalists. He's talked about having 9 rifles pointed at the head of Liz Cheney. He has said that he would use the American military against his political adversaries. I guess that would include me. When the Fox News host, it's sort of a right-leaning station in the United States, said, are you sure? Are you just saying that, right? You're just kidding. No, I'm very, very serious. One of the things that he wants to do is take the FBI out of the Department of Justice and bring it to report directly into the White House, not into the Attorney General. Which I think is also very dangerous and Gestapo-like. And so the rhetoric has gotten way worse. And I will say this, I don't feel American journalists are covering it properly. I think he has immunized them, and he has sort of normalized the rhetoric. And so people hear it. There's very little outrage about it. But I think it's very dangerous. And he's got 2 things that he's now saying. He went back to Project 2025 last night in his rally, saying that he can't wait to implement these things. And a lot of these things are the early stage blueprint for fascism. So I don't know. I don't like the rhetoric, but it's very hard to understand how we're all numb from the rhetoric, because it's way worse now than it was in 2016.
Amelia, Anthony Scaramucci saying there that he holds journalists partly responsible for the way they're covering it. Do you agree with that analysis?
Funnily enough, I don't. I don't think journalists can summon up outrage from the public single-handedly. They have been covering what Trump's been saying, but the problem is that Trump has a singular ability to say shocking things and no one cares. He said it back in 2016 when he said that if he shot someone on Fifth Avenue, no one would even notice. And it has gotten worse since then. But what struck me about the Madison Square Garden rally was it really shows how singular his ability is, because you had a lot of other people on stage saying a lot of horrible things. You had Tucker Carlson saying that Kamala Harris has a low IQ. Stephen Miller said America is for Americans, a Ku Klux Klan slogan. There was, of course, the Tony Hinchcliffe Puerto Rico remarks. Those summoned the outrage. But when Trump says things, he is Teflon. He somehow gets away with it. He has a singular talent, it seems to me.
I think, though, his profile is taking a real hit in the polls. I think saying that guns could be pointed at Liz Cheney and she should see what that's like, I think that's a cut-through atrocity that in these last days of the campaign are changing opinions. So I think it's beginning to stick. He's gotten away, not with murder, but a lot of stuff that's close. But I do think that this is a reckoning, and we're going to see the skill. If the Harris campaign has all the skill and everything she can bring to bear on it, yeah, she'll win.
Dennis, did the bad rhetoric start with Trump?
I think Trump in 2016 took the rhetoric to another level, but the division you see in the US goes back a long way. When I was in the US, George W. Bush was the president. He was deemed by the Democrats at that time to be dumb, stupid, despite the fact that he had a master's degree from Harvard. He was seen to be under the thumb of Cheney. Democrats now consider George W. Bush to be an honourable public servant of their country. I think the last thing I'd say is that don't forget there's an election here not only for the presidency, but also for the Senate and for the House. And I think it's possible, but unlikely, that the one party will win all three. And that will impose a handbrake on whoever might become president. Mm.
What do you make of that, Anthony? Could that be a handbrake?
Yeah, listen, anything is possible. It's you could say, that the most likely outcome is that the vice president wins 6 out of the 7 states that are the swing states in the United States, and then the second most likely outcome is that Donald Trump wins 6 of the 7. So it's that close. But when I've looked at some of the internal poll numbers on the Harris team, they believe that she will eke out an electoral college victory this week. They believe that they're losing the Senate. They think that the Senate will flip to the Republicans, but they think that they're going to flip the House. And so if you look at the numbers and you go state by state, representative by representative, that's what they think. But again, Dennis is right. Anything is possible. It is literally that close. And so it's hard to guess. But I feel she will win based on momentum. It's not vibe. It's just based on momentum, because I can tell you in 2016, Trump had the momentum going in. Remember, he lost the popular vote. He won the Electoral College by about 40,000 votes. And I think she has that momentum right now that he doesn't have. If you look at him, he's dehydrated. He looks very tired on the stump. He's confusing himself. He was in North Carolina yesterday telling them to vote for David McCormick, who's actually the senatorial candidate in Pennsylvania. And she seems way more on message. They've run a tighter, more organized campaign. And this is Trump being Trump, because La Savita and Susie Wiles are telling him to do certain things, focus on what Mr. Wolpe said, the economy and immigration, and he won't do that. He's doubling and tripling down on what he sees as, base nonsense. And I'll just point this out, and I know there's a journalist on the panel. I didn't get her name, so I apologize not referencing it. But when he's talking about non-whites who are immigrants to the United States, when he's talking about non-whites who are immigrants to the United States, in a subhuman way, that they're eating dogs and cats, and he says that they're vermin, and he's got Tom Toman telling people that he's going to put them in camps, in deportation camps. I don't know. I feel like that information is not out there. You know, we've got people on CNN asking the vice president whether or not she's black or did she turn black in response to what the nonsense that Donald Trump is saying. But we're not hammering him and his people about this stuff. Okay, he's talking about people the way the National Socialists talked about people in the 1930s. And so, you know, listen, I guess we're going to allow that, but I don't like it. And I'll work from now until Election Day to see what we can do to help stop his rise back to power.
Amelia?
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm not defending the guy. I think the dogs and cats remark was pretty well reported. I think if you surveyed everyone in this room, most of them, if not all of them, would have heard it before. And in terms of whether it's okay or not, I think that's beside the point. The point is that journalists need to say what he's been saying. They need to tell people. It's actually your job, with respect, as a strategist for the Democrats now, to show people why it's not okay.
Bruce?
But the base believes what he says. It doesn't matter if he tells lies,
Right.
they believe it. And so that gives it its political power. Building on something that Dennis said, he is very smart, he is very cunning, he is very canny, and I think, Anthony, you probably know that as well as anybody. And he learned a lot in the first term. He learned who stopped him from doing things. And loyalty is going to be the #1 attribute of people around. He is not going to have a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff who says, no, I will not send troops into American cities. He's not going to have an attorney general who said, you lost the election, you can't sue. There's something else that's really important here. There was a decision by the Supreme Court that the president is immune from prosecution for doing official acts. So he can break any law passed by Congress. He can go around any court order, and he can enforce his will, and there is he suffers no penalty for doing it.
We're going to keep this discussion going. Yeah, Anthony, just a quick response.
No, I just want to add one thing. Okay, so in addition to what Mr. Wolpe is saying, he said last night he should have never left the White House in January, on the 20th of January, 2021. Right. So, I mean, that's his mindset. And so if you want to live in a democracy and he's saying things like this and he has that immunity decision that we're referencing, it's very dangerous.
Right.
We're going to keep this discussion going with a question from Mike Boland. Hi, Mike.
Hello.
Oh, interesting T-shirt.
Oh, thanks. The 2024 election is very much turning out to be the gender election, with Harris having a significant advantage amongst female voters, whilst Trump seems to have the edge with male voters, particularly those that typically don't engage in politics. So this question I'll direct towards Anthony is, what does the Democratic Party need to be doing differently to better reach and engage young male voters, especially given their current messaging around freedom, reproductive freedom, and even the economy don't seem to be resonating with the bros?
Anthony.
It's interesting. So, I mean, some of the things she could have done, excuse me, that she didn't do is go on several of those podcasts that reach those men, which would include the Joe Rogan podcast and others. For some reason, she felt uncomfortable doing that. And I would say, in her case, I give her an A+ for starting at the gate on the 21st of July and being where she is right now. So you just have to remember she had to coalesce all of those delegates and prevent an internecine fight prior to the convention. She had to prepare for the convention, had to prepare for the debate, and then she had to merge her staff into the Biden team. You know, her election campaign headquarters is in Wilmington, Delaware. That's not her home state. So that was sort of like an M&A transaction she had to do contemporaneous to running for president. So this has been a hole in her strategy. But I think there's a lot of things it could do, and I'll just name 3 quickly. More broadcast messaging into those mediums, bring influencers into the fold to explain what their strategies are. And the last thing, and I think this is probably the most important thing, is address, make a consensus compromise on certain things that those people want. And I think there's some elements of the culture that those people do not want. We're going to be voting tomorrow here in New York on whether or not women can play competitive sports with men in certain categories. It's called Proposition 1. And there's a lot of people in that culture that you're referencing that don't want that. And so I think there's a compromise in there. And I think she's clearly someone that would make that compromise. And just one last quick point, she has opened her tent. I mean, she's reached out to the Cheneys. She's reached out to Mark Esper. She's reached out to General Milley. You know, if Bernie Sanders, Anthony Scaramucci, and Dick and Liz Cheney walk into a bar, okay, it's the vice president's bar. Unfortunately, I don't have the punchline for that yet. I'm trying to develop it.
It's a really good line, but it's a pretty wild party, I imagine.
Yeah, but you get the point that I'm making. It's a big tent, but there is a hole in the tent that you're referencing. But she really didn't have a tremendous amount of time to fill all those holes. I think she's generally done a good job.
Okay. Amelia, there is a really big gender difference in this election. And clearly, you know, Donald Trump is not communicating with women very well, and the Kamala Harris campaign isn't communicating with men very well. What's the disconnect?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating question. I read that men under 30 have moved 14 points towards the Republicans since 2020. So that is a warning sign for Democrats, and I don't know what the answer is. I do think it's surprising that Harris didn't choose to go on Joe Rogan. Obviously, time is limited. But I think the other part of this equation is women, because you might expect that women would step up when reproductive freedoms are on the ballot. And I think they are to some extent, but that story is also a little bit complicated too. Opinion polls do show that abortion is not a #1 issue for any women except women under 30. The issues that women in general are most energized by in this election are, to Bruce's earlier point, the economy, immigration, sometimes crime. And so the question is, there's a disconnect both amongst women and men on either side. And I think it's a bit of a mystery how to bridge it at this point.
Dennis, have you seen this kind of gender differentiation before?
Well, personally, I think to simply describe it in gender terms is way over simplistic. I think there are a lot of social issues sitting below it, which I certainly don't understand. But I was listening to a program the other day, and David Brooks, who was probably one of the very best political, social commentators in the US, was pointing out that there's a 43-point differential between college-educated women who intend to vote for Harris and high school-educated men who intend to vote for Harris. A 43-point differential. That is more than a gender divide. There's a lot of big social issues sitting in there.
What are those social issues?
The social issues, well, the social issues principally are the economy, my household budget, and is my future going to be better tomorrow than yesterday, than today? But
why the gender difference? Why do men and women see it so differently?
I think women. The polling on women is 55% of the women are for her, against 40%. It's still the biggest gender gap, and older women are also voting because they were there when Roe was established. 50 years of living under a constitutional right, and it's been taken away from them. So I think it has a profound effect. Wherever it's been on the ballot, it has won.
Where would the Democrats be without the abortion issue?
I think they would be in trouble without the abortion issue. But the fact is, the heart of the matter that Harris is attacking is this a referendum on Donald Trump? Is he fit to be president? Can we really go forward with him for another 4 years? And look at him, look at his character. Is he more dangerous than he was before? And Trump's popularity is under 40%. You almost can't win. Joe Biden could not win the presidency from being under 40%. So all these political factors are in play, which is why it's so hard to read and so hard to answer your first question, who's going to win?
Yeah. Anthony, I want to come back to you on this issue of gender. I've heard you talk a lot about it. You know, a lot of us listen to you mainly because we like your car, but there are some other reasons too. You've got a very nice car. But just saying, I hope your number plate's okay.
My podcast has crashed that car over the weekend, which is fine.
Have you fixed the number plate? It was a little bit of a conundrum. I saw that.
We did.
Yeah,
no,
thank goodness.
We fixed it. Yeah. She seemed pretty smug about it actually when she smashed it, but it's fine.
Well, it's okay. You've recovered. But on the gender question, I've heard you talk about the white lash after Obama was, well, you know, he did his 2 terms, of course, but after his terms,
Yeah.
and talking about a misogyny in the electorate. Do you think those things are in play during this election campaign? And
I do. Yes,
Yeah?
of course I do. I mean, Donald Trump is running on 4 pillars. He's running on cruelty, he's running on anti-immigration, he's running on racism, and he's running on misogyny. And if you don't believe me, just listen to the speeches and listen to what he's saying. And you know, I mean, does the vice president have a low IQ? Is she dumb? Is she really? Come on. Look at what she has done with her career, okay? She was a sitting senator in our largest state, the 4th largest economy in the world. She was the vice president of the United States. So he runs on those 4 pillars. And unfortunately, we have a lot of people in the country that fall into those categories. And so it's a shame to watch. You know, he took over the Republican Party. The Republican Party that Dennis worked with when he was in the White House, the Bushes, the Cheneys, the Romneys, the McCains, is long gone. It was a hostile takeover of that party. So Trump is literally a third-party insurgent that's running off something that's been in the country forever. It's called American nativism. Our first America First movement started in the 1930s. It was put down by Franklin Roosevelt. The American aviator, Charles Lindbergh, Huey Long, they ran a Nazi rally in 1939 in Madison Square Garden with all the symbols of Nazism. And so there's always a group of people, unfortunately, that believe America is America for Americans, okay? And it is a KKK slogan, but it was also a slogan in Nazi Germany. Adolf Hitler said it many times that Germany is for Germany and only for Germans. And so we have this element in our midst. We've been able to suppress it. We've been able to put it down. But in this case, Trump is attracting these people. Now, I just want to finish with this. I think this is important. Ideologically, I don't think he's exactly like them, but he attracts them. And the danger is he becomes their vessel if he's successfully elected back into the presidency.
Can I just say one thing, Patricia? I think a big question for progressives in the United States and Democrats is what role have they played in so many young men being attracted to Trump? Simply describing it in terms of misogynistic and these simple, I think it's far too simple. There are things going on there, and progressives have played their part in pushing young men in that direction.
do you think that's true, Amelia?
I do think that there's something cultural going on that we need to touch on, and I know that you reported last week that there were similar numbers of young men in Australia and New Zealand who support Trump as well. And you only have to look at the overt gender play that he's made here. Stephen Miller was on Fox recently, and he said that men's dating lives will improve if they vote for Trump. This is a very overt decision they've made to court a particular group of young men. And we do have to look at why those young men are so attracted to it. I completely agree.
Bruce, are Democrats partly responsible for driving men to this?
If you're not popular in certain segments, you're not serving them. And there are issues of, you know, where's my future in 10 years? How are the elites treating me? Where is equity across the board for people who really need it too? So there's idealism and realism, and sometimes they converge and say, I don't want to participate with this political party.
Anthony, what do you make of that idea that was made by Dennis, that actually progressives have pushed men in Trump's direction?
Well, for a spy, he's incredibly diplomatic. You know, what he's basically saying is that the DEI, the diversity, equity, inclusion stuff, has left out white males. And Professor Scott Galloway, who's a very close friend of mine, we're actually working on a project right now. White males age 18 to 25 are 25% more likely to commit suicide than any other group in the society. And to Dennis's point, if you go to NYU, New York University, there are 75 different advocacy groups for various people in various sexual orientations, various designations of identity, but none for white males. And so this is something where there is a white lash, if you will, that's happening. And so they're going to Trump because Trump is sort of an avatar for their anger for not being recognized. So that is definitely true. It's definitely out there. It has to be addressed. The point I was trying to make in the last question, I think in 100 days, going from flipping flapjacks for your nieces to, hey, you're going to be the presidential nominee for us, I'm dropping out of the race, and her building everything she needed to build to be where she is right now, I think it was an impossible thing for her to handle that issue as well. But it is an issue that has to be addressed.
Yeah. Now I'd like to bring in Liza Marion. Hi, Liza.
Hi, how are you?
Great.
As a Ukrainian, I'm concerned by Mr. Trump repeatedly saying that he would end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. What do you think Mr. Trump means by that? And most importantly, what do leaders of certain countries think he means? What decisions could these leaders potentially make in case Mr. Trump returns to the White House?
Dennis.
Well, one, I don't think you take him literally when he says within 24 hours. By and large, Trump critics take everything he says literally. His supporters don't take it literally. By the way, that doesn't imply anything about my own views. But I think Putin would clearly like Trump to win. I think NATO partners and Ukraine would be very nervous about a Trump victory for obvious reasons. I think Trump and a number of Republicans don't like the amount of military assistance that has been provided to Ukraine, and I think Trump would use that to put pressure on Ukraine to come to some sort of agreement with Russia. That, of course,
Means surrendering land, right?
Well, it also implies that Putin is someone of goodwill. Putin is someone who does not believe Ukraine has a right to exist.
Right.
So I think if Trump does give away Ukraine, as he's capable of doing, I think that'll have global implications in terms of the way allies see the US and work with the US and each other.
Are you worried about that?
I personally think it would be a dreadful mistake for the US, NATO and other countries such as Australia to walk away from Ukraine. This was a blatant, outright invasion, and it needs to be resisted.
Anthony Scaramucci, if I can bring you in. The question there from Liza, and Liza, thank you for your question about Trump returning to the White House and what he would do with Ukraine. How do you see it?
Well, I mean, it's very important to apply context here to what Dennis is saying. Of course, I agree with him. But remember, in 1991, when Ukraine returned to its sovereignty after being repressed for over 300 years, they had a nuclear arsenal. They were the sixth largest nuclear arsenal in the world. President Clinton signed a treaty with them to get back the nukes in exchange for security agreements. We called that Operation Porcupine. We sent all types of armaments to them to protect them against the specter of another rising tension with Russia, which has been there for several hundred years. So we dropped that obligation in 2017. It's important for people to remember when Trump says that he didn't start any wars, he contributed to that war by delaying arms shipments. He delayed so many arms shipments to the point where there were whistleblowers that got him impeached the first time. So it's very important to understand the context. But remember this, in the 1930s, Franklin Roosevelt came up with an idea called Lend-Lease, and he sent armaments to Russia, and he sent armaments to the UK to protect those countries against the Nazis. To really understand the Western alliance and to understand the ideals of liberal democracies, we have to protect each other. We have 5.7 billion people around the world that are living under some type of totalitarian regime. And we have to join forces with each other. And whether the United States likes it or not, it's the biggest economy with the biggest military. And we have to be engaged with our allies around the world to ensure this freedom. Because any one domino that gets toppled could lead to your domino. And that's the problem that the Republicans have right now. They don't understand the history and the scourge of totalitarianism and dictatorships. And we have to remind them we've got to get Trump out of there, and we have to reset this thing from a long-term alliance perspective.
Liza?
He's a useful idiot for Vladimir Putin, by the way. I mean, it's just obvious.
Liza, are you really worried about this? Are you worried about the election result because of the implications for Ukraine?
Look, I probably can speak from all Ukrainians saying that we live and breathe with these thoughts about this. We just monitor the news all the time, and this is our number one thought right now, because there's so much at stake, and our freedom is at stake, our country's existence is at stake. So it's a very important thing for us, this election, yeah.
Now, Anthony, we're going to let you go because you got up at the crack of dawn for us, which we really appreciate. But before I do let you go, I just want to ask you, what will you be looking at really closely on your election night?
Well, I mean, for me, there are two big counties. There's Oakland County in Michigan, and there's Montgomery County in Pennsylvania. If those two counties, those are the 100,000 people that Amelia was referencing, if those two counties go for the vice president, she'll probably win what's called the blue wall. She'll win Pennsylvania, she'll win Wisconsin, and she'll win Michigan, and she'll become the 47th president. And I just, before I leave, I just want to say something that is important to Eric's point about the economy. You have to know that this would be if Trump wins, this would be the first time in 60 years with the stock market at an all-time high and the economy growing and unemployment in the U.S. below 5%, that the incumbent party didn't maintain its position in the presidency and in the White House. So it's a close election. It's interesting, but I do think the odds and the economic conditions right now favor her.
Well, thank you so much for getting up so early.
Thank you.
And,
Nice to
and
hear
have
you.
a good election. Anthony Scaramucci joining us his morning, our evening. If you're just joining us, you're watching Q&A Live with Dennis Richardson, Amelia, Lester and Bruce Wolpe with me in the studio. And we're also joined tonight by Paul Smith, who's a Public Data Director at research group YouGov. Paul, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
OK, so Paul, you've been doing, YouGov has been doing a big poll and it's looked at thousands of swing voters and it says Kamala Harris will win. Really?
We think Kamala Harris will firstly win the popular vote by millions, but more importantly, the Electoral College, we think the most likely result is that she'll win 292 Electoral College votes to 246 for Donald Trump. But there are several states which are very, very close. We think that Donald Trump has the edge in Arizona and Georgia, but that Kamala Harris will just get there in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Wisconsin, Nevada and North Carolina, and that would give her the result very narrowly, but it's a close-run thing and it'll all be about turnout. OK,
it certainly will. We know that, of course, in 2016, pollsters got it wrong and Hillary Clinton didn't win the Electoral College. I think that was a sort of stinging experience for many. Why do you think you're so trustworthy this time? Well,
there's three issues that make what we've done quite different. Firstly, we've polled 100,000 people. So this is not 1,000 people in one particular location. And we've done it over 12 months. And secondly, it's a model. So you take all the data attributes that belong to those people, their age, sex, what their income is, and you model that across the entire United States. And we've done that over 12 months. So firstly, it's the amount of data. Secondly, it's the quality. And those two issues allow us to do a model which is something quite different. It's been done with Stanford, with Arizona State University and Yale, to develop something which we think will be the closest thing to accurate that can humanly be done.
People in YouGov a little nervous, though?
No, we think that this is going to be very close to the result, but what we can't predict is turnout that might change. We have a model for turnout that's based on what people say and what they have done in the past, but if they get out the vote from one or the two campaigns is very good in a particular state, it can make all the difference. But there's one thing you should look for in terms of the different states. In Pennsylvania, this is about working class votes in a place like Berkshire, which is an industrial town with Reading in it, voting for Trump. That's where he's going tomorrow. And outside of Philadelphia, the state, the area just outside of that, all the ex-urban areas, they have usually been Republican. The most upscale parts of the whole area, they're looking to win that. Harris is looking to win those, but she'll probably win those areas in Chester County, but lose in Berkshire, where the working class voters are in Reading. And that is a real problem for the Democrats. They'll have to sort out. They've got to get working class votes if they want to win against any other candidate rather than Trump.
And of course, that was Joe Biden's secret weapon in the last election, of course, when he won in 2020. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Paul Smith from YouGov. Lots to get to tonight. Here's a question from Lincoln Jolly.
My question is, what do you believe the likelihood is that Australian agreements with the US, such as AUKUS and the free trade agreement with America, may come under threat by a second Trump presidency? And what impacts might that have for Australia?
Dennis.
I don't believe either will be under threat with a Trump presidency.
That's it.
Quite obviously, a Trump presidency introduces, it'll be an interesting ride. There'll be surprises. There'll be points in time when people will question whether those agreements will come under pressure. But I personally believe that they're not under threat at all.
But Trump has promised 10% tariffs, so how does that work?
Well, he has. Whether he applies it evenly across all countries, we have a couple of things going for us. Leaving aside the alliance, one, we have a very big trade deficit with the United States. That makes us look good in Trump's eyes. I don't think it's good, but it looks good in his eyes. Secondly, we buy most of our defence equipment from the United States. Trump is transactional, and I think when he looks in our direction, I think it'll be unlikely if he breaks the free trade agreement. More importantly for us economically is what he might do in respect of China, which could precipitate a trade war, and we would be negatively affected because of that.
And how big a risk is that?
I think there's a real risk. There is a protectionist tide in the United States which is bipartisan. It is really across both Republicans and also Democrats. But I think while Biden has maintained the Trump tariffs on Chinese goods, I think Trump will increase them very significantly. He's talked about 60%, 200%. Forget what the percentage. It will be quite significant. How China responds to that and what else the US does could precipitate a trade war. That could impact on Chinese demand for Australian exports.
Amelia?
Yeah, I just don't think Trump necessarily understands the concept of an alliance. I think that transactional approach that he applies to things means that the idea of sticking by someone through thick and thin, I don't think it comes easy to him or naturally to him. And I don't think that he thinks that multilateral institutions or alliances are even worth it. He approaches everything with a business-minded approach of what can you do for me, and that's fundamentally unpredictable. The notion of an alliance is that you stick with someone and it doesn't matter what happens, and I just don't think that's how he's wired. On the other hand, I do think that there are things that he needs from Australia. And I think geographically, Australia is important in the event of some kind of invasion of Taiwan. But I just don't.
You don't think necessarily the AUKUS deal, for instance, is done and dusted?
Well, I don't think that we can predict what he's going to do, because I think that whether we take him literally or seriously, he has consistently talked about NATO being a waste of time. I don't think that for instance, the Quad was something started under President Biden with India and the UK and Australia. I don't think he's particularly interested in developing those kinds of relationships, and that's something that the Biden administration, by contrast, has really stressed.
Bruce?
Yes, I agree with that. I mean, he wants to pull troops out of South Korea. That's going to change the balance in the region. And Dennis is absolutely right. What happens with China will trigger other things in which Australia will become enveloped. And on the bilateral stuff, on the trade, it's going to be an early test on the tariffs as to whether Australia gets an exemption. On AUKUS, I think he's going to look at it like a business deal. Okay, where are the contracts? Where's the money? Who's getting the jobs?
So what do you make of Joe Hockey's idea that we offer, I don't know, wasn't it that we pay early, basically?
It'll be tactical things like that that will preserve. Remember, he didn't like the U.S. Mexico-Canada Free Trade Agreement. He says the worst deal in history. He tore it up, renegotiated it. It was the same deal that he tore up, but his name was on it. And I think there will be a similar fate for AUKUS.
I don't even think it'll be tactical. I think if Greg Norman calls him on the right day and says, let's go and play golf,
and can I say
work.
that Joe Hockey did a great job. He lost every golf game to Trump that he ever played, and it was terrific. The ambassador never gave a
Right,
greater
okay,
sacrifice.
so how's Kevin Rudd going to go?
Pardon?
How's Kevin Rudd going to go?
That's not the main question. The main question is the relationship between the president and the prime minister and how they get along. I think it could be rocky initially, just given the two men, where they come from, what their values are, and that will have to be tested.
How do you think Anthony Albanese will go with that, Dennis?
He'll be fine.
He'll be right.
Yeah, look, in terms of Kevin Rudd, unless certain elements of the media deliberately set out to sabotage him, Kevin Rudd...
Are you suggesting that's happened?
It clearly has. And, but if that doesn't continue, Rudd will be fine. He is extremely hardworking. He's been highly effective in Washington. He has good links across the political spectrum. And if you go back to that interview where President Trump made negative comments about Rudd, two things stood out. First of all, he didn't know who the Australian ambassador was in Washington, and that's perfectly reasonable. Secondly,
he was kind of fed the lines, wasn't he? It was Nigel Farage.
He was absolutely fed the lines. Secondly, he had a qualification to what he said. He said, if he continues his negative approach when I'm president, he won't last long. There was the if. So I think Kevin Rudd will be fine because he's doing an outstanding job. Anthony Albanese, he will be sensible about it. I mean, sure, there's always a risk that someone in the Australian Labor Party will say something negative about Trump, which gets a bit of a run in the US, and Trump responds negatively to that. But look, if you go back to 2017, when he became president, Australia did something very sensible then. It was in May of 2017. It was the 70th anniversary of the signing of ANZUS. That was celebrated on the USS Intrepid in New York. President Trump was the main guest at that. That introduced him to the relationship with Australia. And I think the Turnbull government and subsequently the Morrison government and Joe Hockey played that, I think, very well.
They did.
Could it all go wrong? Of course it could. I don't think it will. I think Anthony Albanese is too sensible to do anything but keep it on the right path, bearing in mind there'll be wobbles and there'll be times when people will be hoeing and hawing, but that's okay.
I agree with what Dennis said. And the relationship between the two countries, Australia had the most untroubled relationship with the United States than I think almost any other country in the world. That includes Israel, includes in Europe, France, Germany, the UK. And remember, he rubbished Theresa May and Angela Merkel and so forth.
But
so
Bruce,
Australia's in a
isn't
favoured
the problem
position.
that perhaps the Australian population may demand a different response from the government?
It may. It's going to become a political issue. How are we aligned with the United States? If Trump attacks America's democracy and it's not the United States that we know and respect,
I imagine there'll be a lot of pressure on the government in that context.
There'll be pressure from all political quarters.
Well, if you go back to George W. Bush and after the invasion of Iraq, the Lowy polls showed a real drop-off in support for the alliance. I think that if Trump becomes president, I think you'll see a similar drop-off in the polls. There may well be pressure inside the Labor Party or from the Australian people at large. However, we claim to be democratic. Since when do you only respect the democracy of another country when the outcome is to your liking?
That's a good point. Next, we'll hear from Bob Linican. Hi, Bob. Take it away, Bob.
The Democrats want to put Trump in jail. Isn't that the greatest threat to democracy, trying to jail your political opponents? Isn't that just what dictators like Vladimir Putin do?
Dennis, is that what they want to do?
Well, I'm personally sceptical and critical of the legal charges that were brought against Trump in New York. They were pretty low level in the big scheme of things. However, I do believe and I do hope Trump legal processes should be pursued against Trump in respect of the 6th of January 2021. He clearly sought to overturn a democratic outcome, and I hope he faces the legal consequences of that.
That's an interesting question, though, Amelia. I mean, clearly Bob sees what has gone on with Trump as a sort of political witch hunt from the Democrats. It's the view of some people in the United States as well. Yeah, I know that the defence is that that's not been the case, but is that how it's viewed?
Well, interestingly, I was going to say, Bob, that I think some people on the left would agree with you in the sense that there has been a debate in the US about whether optics-wise it looks bad for these democratically appointed prosecutors to be going after a presidential candidate, and it doesn't encourage a faith or confidence in democracy. But I would turn that question around a little bit, if I can. Trump has vowed to fire Jack Smith, who's the prosecutor who's brought 2 of these cases against him, the minute he gets into office. I'm sorry, he said within 2 seconds of getting into office. He said he would punish the prosecutors and the judges who are currently overseeing his cases. And I think the more compelling argument is that in a country which is ruled by laws, everyone, including the president, is accountable to those laws. And I lived in Washington, D.C. when the insurrection happened, and it was not a pleasant day. It was really scary. 4 police officers lost their lives as a result of the riots there that day, the insurrection there that day. And I personally would like to see the people who were involved in that held accountable for it.
Our next question is from Edward Bell-Smith. Hi, Edward.
Hi. Last week, Bernie Sanders released a video aimed at disaffected left-wing voters who see the war in Gaza as a top issue. Do you think his words will sway them? And what do you think will be the impacts of the war on both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's chances of being elected?
Bruce.
I think it is an issue, particularly in the state of Michigan, which has, excuse me, the largest Arab American, Muslim American community in the United States. The people there in and around Dearborn and nearby areas they're livid, heartbroken over what's occurring in Gaza, and we understand that. And so can they vote? Can many of them vote for Harris? I think the answer is no. Will they vote for Trump? Trump has been anti-Muslim in many respects. I'm not sure. whether some can vote for him, but they may not vote. And anything that diminishes, there will be about 100,000 votes from that community. Anything that diminishes Harris's margin in Michigan, really Biden's margin from 2020, puts the state in jeopardy. So yeah, it's a very potent political issue in that state. There are other communities in Georgia and in Arizona as well. So yeah, it's a factor.
Can she win without the left?
She can win by building up others. Yes, I mean, the women's vote, for example, is massive of historic proportions.
Well, can she win white women? Because white women haven't been easy to win, really, for Democrats.
When we've seen, again, these issues on the ballot, yes, they have come out. So she believes she has them. Just one thing on this. When you look at her, she's campaigning with confidence. In other words, if she thought she was going to lose, she wouldn't look the way she looks. She wouldn't act the way she looks. She wouldn't have that confidence.
I don't know about that. I think she's kind of got the ability to kind of rise beyond whatever she's reading.
She's used to standing up and going forth and making her argument.
But Trump he's so angry and he's so livid and he's so he looks like he's going to lose, right?
Dennis, do you think he has that vibe as well? There's been a lot of reading into the Trump vibe.
Look, I simply don't know.
Should we ask the galahs again?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, galah time. Now we have another question from Sylvia Lynn.
I'm an American that's lived in Sydney for 3 years. I was born in Minnesota and I grew up in Ohio. For most of my life, I was one of the 42 to 48% of eligible American voters who did not vote. However, once Trump entered US politics, I have voted in every single presidential election because I believe that character and integrity matter in leaders. The US is currently facing unprecedented polarization. No matter who wins on the 5th of November, there will be 65 to 70 million voters who are not happy with the result. How can the two sides come together and bridge the gap post-election? Is it possible to bridge the political divide, or is the chasm irreconcilable?
Sylvia, that is such a great question, but I just want to stay with you. I'm so fascinated by that essentially the rise of Trump turned you into an engaged political citizen. How did you grow up? Was politics a part of your household? Was it part of your life?
Not really. We never really talked much about politics in my family. But for me, it was probably the Access Hollywood tape when Trump was talking about sexually assaulting women, and it felt like he was bragging about it. That kind of got me fired up.
And yet women voted for Trump in that election, which lots of people were shocked about. Do you think something's shifted since? What are you hearing from people back home?
I mean, what I'm hearing, I think, is similar to what other people have been hearing, and a lot of it is Roe v. Wade and the Dobbs case. I think that's changing a lot. People like me grew up with the assumption that we would have the ability to have an abortion or to have the choice if we wanted to. And having something like that, which felt foundational, like bedrock, to be taken away, I think made a big difference.
Well, I'm glad you're here with us now, Sylvia. You're absolutely welcome here. Bruce, the fundamental question, is that big chasm irreconcilable?
Under Trump, I don't think so. He is the divider-in-chief. He's not the uniter-in-chief. And I think the country wants a president that's going to bring... This is a leadership issue. Country wants a president to bring people together. Now, Kamala Harris has said, I want a Republican in my cabinet. She said, even if you vote against me, I want to work with you and try and be responsive to what you're saying. So I think it's going to be really hard because in my lifetime, I haven't seen the country as divided as it is today. And it is extremely sad and frankly terrifying. And there's too much violence. But we may be able to get to come together, and I certainly hope so. But with the spirit that you have, that's what we need.
Amelia?
I do think there's a looming issue with minority rule, and that's an issue that I see people getting more and more frustrated with in the US. If you look at the fact that since 2000, there have been 2 presidents who won office without winning the popular vote, and there's a growing frustration with the Supreme Court. One of the 3 branches of government is led by a 6-3 court, 6 Republicans, 3 democratically appointed judges, and that doesn't feel representative of the country as a whole, which is so evenly in lockstep. So I do think that minority rule issue will become an issue, but maybe it's because I'm now a dual citizen and I'm now also American that I can't help but feel ultimately optimistic. I think of this Winston Churchill quote about America all the time, where he said that Americans can always be counted on to do the right thing after they've exhausted all other possibilities.
Dennis.
The polarisation you see in the United States today will continue after the next election, after the election in 2 days' time, whether it's President Harris or President Trump. The notion that President Harris will unite the country in a way in which Trump can't, I think is fantasy. The divisions are too deep. The chances are you'll have a divided Congress. But regardless of that, the differences between the Democrats and the Republicans are too great, and they're getting greater. They may, who knows, in 20 years' time there may be a love-in and it resolves itself somehow, but certainly over the next few years the polarisation is going to continue.
OK, let's reconvene in 20 years. Is it a deal, everyone? That's all we have time for. Thanks to our panel, Dennis Richardson, Amelia Lester, Bruce Wolpe, and of course, a little earlier, Anthony Scaramucci. Thank you for sharing your stories and your questions. Next week, I'll be with you live from Brisbane. Head to our website to register to be in the audience. We're going to have a result by then, so things will be clearer. What a fantastic conversation we've had tonight. I know I'll be glued to the news, as many of you will be, as the election unfolds this week. Have a great night.